Have you ever felt completely drained even after a full night's sleep? Have you ever looked around and, despite everything seeming to be in place, felt as though something inside you was broken, out of place, lost? Maybe you've experienced a nameless emptiness, a fatigue that no amount of rest can relieve, a sadness without a visible cause, yet it lingers in every thought, every day. It's in this dark, silent, and often misunderstood place that the journey through depression begins. And it doesn't matter your age, social class, profession, or appearance. Depression doesn't choose its victims based on logic. It simply arrives. And when it does, it steals the color from the world. You, who once smiled naturally, start rehearsing smiles in the mirror. You, who used to make plans, begin counting the minutes until you can sleep again. Not because sleep feels good, but because being awake hurts too much. Depression doesn't scream. It whispers. And what it whispers gradually seeps into your thoughts, distorting reality, draining energy, and eroding the meaning of things. It doesn't need grand gestures to make its presence known. It's in that recurring thought of, what's the point? That weight on your chest when you wake up, that desire to pull away from everything and everyone. That's how it settles in, not like an explosion, but like an invisible leak that slowly takes away the air, the light, the sound, the will. The world may stay the same, but inside everything changes. And the worst part is that many people don't even realize what's happening. They try to be strong, they hide it, they overwork themselves, they say it will pass, while deep inside, they are collapsing in silence. In this early stage, one of the greatest dangers is judgment from others, and especially from oneself. Comments like, "You're just being dramatic," "You have no reason to feel this way," or "Others have it worse, don't just hurt." They reinforce the internal guilt that the person with depression already feels for not being able to climb out of the hole on their own. It's as if the pain they feel must come with a certificate to be valid, as if one could only suffer if there's a clear, tragic justification. But depression needs no justification. It exists. It hurts. And it's real, even if invisible. And the most painful part is that, unlike other illnesses, depression often isolates the person instead of drawing people closer. Someone with depression usually doesn't ask for help, not because they don't want to, but because they feel like they don't deserve it. This feeling of worthlessness is one of the pillars of depression. The person begins to believe that their existence is a burden on others, and so they go silent. Not out of pride, but out of self-abandonment. And maybe this is one of the most important points of this conversation. When you stop listening to yourself, stop validating yourself, stop taking care of yourself, depression grows, and it thrives in silence. It feeds on denial, on hurry, on the fear of seeming weak, on the shame of admitting you're not okay. That's why recognizing something is wrong is the first and hardest step. Saying "I need help" is one of the bravest things a person can do, because for someone drowning in darkness, even that can feel impossible. And that's why this video exists. To be perhaps that voice that welcomes you when everything else is silent. To remind you that you are not alone, to guide you gently, without rushing, without pressure, on a path of understanding and rebuilding. Here, you don't have to pretend you're okay. Here, you can breathe, you can listen to yourself, you can allow yourself to feel without guilt. Because depression does not define you. It is part of your story, not your destiny. And even if right now everything feels meaningless, I want you to know, there is a way back. It starts slowly. It starts with listening, with presence, and with the simple yet powerful truth that you deserve to be cared for. Are you ready to begin listening to your pain with kindness instead of judgment? Ready to understand that your pain is valid, even if others can't see it? Ready to take a step, small but real, toward your healing? If so, then we walk this path together. The first major misconception that prevents so many people from understanding what they're going through is believing that depression and sadness are the same thing, but they are not. Sadness is a natural, universal, and temporary emotion. It arises in response to something specific, a loss, a disappointment, a frustration, and even when it's intense, it has a cycle. It appears, it manifests, and over time, it dissolves. Depression, on the other hand, is a state, a deep and ongoing descent into a darkness that doesn't need a clear reason to exist. It not only replaces sadness, it also steals the space of joy, motivation, hope, and pleasure. It's not just about feeling sad. It's about no longer being able to feel at all. Not pain, not joy, just emptiness. It's common to hear phrases like, "I think I'm depressed because I've been feeling sad for a few days." And yes, feeling sad is part of life. But depression is not just a bad feeling. It is a mental disorder, recognized by medicine and psychology, with clearly defined clinical criteria. It's not a phase. It's not drama. It's not a lack of faith or willpower. It's a deep alteration in the way the brain processes emotions, thoughts, and external stimuli. There's a neurochemical imbalance, especially involving substances like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, that directly impacts a person's emotional and cognitive functioning. What does that mean in practice? That often saying, "Think positive, snap out of it," or "just exercise" doesn't help, because the body and mind simply can't. It's not a choice. It's a real limitation. That's why it's so important to distinguish sadness from depression. A person who is sad can still imagine a better future, still react when something good happens, still find small escapes. A person who is depressed sees no way out, and that's one of the most alarming signs: the loss of perspective. Life stops making sense. The things that once brought pleasure, listening to music, cooking, going out with friends, lose their color, their taste, their value. A deep apathy emerges, a kind of existential numbness where everything feels useless, heavy, distant. And often this comes accompanied by intense feelings of guilt, failure, and self-deprecation, as if the person were under constant internal judgment, hearing voices that repeat, "You're not enough, you're useless, nobody cares." And the cruelest part is that, in an effort to hide the pain, because yes, there is still a lot of stigma, many people wear masks. They go to work, they smile, they dress well, they interact. On the outside, they look fine. On the inside, they are falling apart. This is known as smiling depression, and it makes everything even more confusing, especially for those around. Because how do you help someone who looks normal? How do you know that the always cheerful co-worker is actually battling suicidal thoughts every morning? How can you tell that the family member who's always sleeping isn't lazy but trying to escape unbearable pain? Diagnosing depression requires sensitivity, attentive listening, and often professional intervention. This is where a diagnostic criteria has come into play, used by psychologists and psychiatrists. According to international manuals like the DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, depression is characterized by a set of persistent symptoms lasting at least 2 weeks, such as depressed mood most of the day, loss of interest in previously pleasurable activities, constant fatigue or lack of energy, insomnia or excessive sleep, appetite and weight changes, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt, difficulty concentrating, thoughts of death or suicide. It's important to remember, not all symptoms must be present to receive a diagnosis. Each person experiences depression differently, which is why care must always be individualized. Another key point is that there are different types of depression. The most well-known is major depressive disorder, but there is also dysthymia, a chronic low-grade depression, seasonal affective disorder, related to lack of sunlight during certain times of year, postpartum depression, among other variations. Each form requires specific approaches, personalized care, and often a multidisciplinary treatment plan that includes therapy, medication, and lifestyle changes. The path to healing is not simple, but it does exist. And it begins with the most important step, understanding that depression is a real treatable illness and that you or someone you love are not alone in this fight. So, if you've felt that something's not right for a long time, if life has lost its shine, if your thoughts have become darker and nothing seems to make sense anymore, it may be time to listen more closely to what your body and your soul are trying to tell you. And more than that, it may be time to seek help. Because understanding depression is the first step to facing it. And even if the road seems long and dark, it doesn't have to be walked alone. There is light, there is treatment, there are ways forward, and above all, there is hope. It's interesting how, from an early age, we learn to identify a fever, a headache, a cut on the skin. We know how to recognize the physical signs of a cold. We understand when something is wrong with the stomach or the heart. But what about when it's the soul that is unwell? What happens when the body, unable to express emotional suffering, begins to scream in silence through subtle, deep, and often ignored symptoms? Depression rarely arrives with fanfare. It creeps in slowly, like a fog spreading across your thoughts, your habits, your movements, even your sense of identity. It is a master of disguise, and that's why it demands from us a careful eye to recognize the signs that, even in silence, are always there. The body speaks, and in depression it speaks a lot. The first way it finds to express itself is through exhaustion, but it's not ordinary fatigue. It's a kind of depletion that rest doesn't fix, that doesn't go away after a quiet weekend, that persists even after hours of sleep. The simple act of getting out of bed can feel like a marathon. Taking a shower, brushing your teeth, making coffee, basic tasks become monumental. It's not a lack of willpower. It's as if your life energy has been drained, as if every part of your body is covered by an invisible layer of weight. And this goes far beyond laziness. It's the body trying to survive on the bare minimum, because everything hurts, everything weighs, everything tires. Another common sign is sleep disturbance. Some people with depression can't sleep. They spend hours in bed, staring at the ceiling, trapped in relentless cycles of negative thoughts. Others sleep excessively, not for pleasure but as a form of escape. Sleep stops being rest and becomes refuge. But even after many hours of sleep, the body remains exhausted. These disturbances can also affect dreams, making them more vivid, distressing, or completely absent, as if the unconscious mind is also worn out. And when the body doesn't rest, everything begins to collapse. Immunity drops, muscles ache, breathing shortens, the skin shows the exhaustion. It's as if the entire body is begging for help. Eating habits are often affected as well. Some lose their appetite entirely. Food tastes like nothing. Eating becomes an obligation that may even trigger nausea or disgust. Others, on the contrary, eat compulsively, not out of hunger but as an attempt to fill the void. Sweets, carbs, heavy foods, chosen not for nutrition but for the brief illusion of comfort. This imbalance can lead to weight fluctuations, hormonal disruption, digestive issues. But the most important thing to understand is, it's not neglect. It's the body's way of expressing a pain that words can't reach. And then there are the cognitive symptoms, the most deceptive of all. Difficulty concentrating, short-term memory loss, a constant sense of mental fog. Reading a single paragraph can require immense effort. Making simple decisions becomes a maze of uncertainty. Thoughts slow down and get tangled, as if a mist has settled over everything. This can be incredibly frustrating, especially for those who were once productive, quick, creative. The mind, once a landscape of ideas and clarity, becomes a battlefield where critical inner voices shout louder than any whisper of hope. In addition, there's the emotional impact that seeps into every relationship. A depressed person may become more irritable, sensitive, withdrawn. They may pull away from friends, avoid conversations, cancel plans. Sometimes this is misinterpreted as coldness or rudeness, but in reality, it's just an attempt to protect oneself, to conserve energy, to avoid the burden of social interaction when even keeping their own body upright is a daily struggle. And all of this, the fatigue, disrupted sleep, disordered eating, mental confusion and isolation, forms a cycle that feeds itself and, if not interrupted, can lead to increasingly severe outcomes, including suicidal thoughts. That's why listening to the body is an act of wisdom, and listening to the mind is an act of courage. Many times the first signs that something is wrong don't appear as tears, but as insomnia, not as words, but as tightness in the chest, not as cries, but as prolonged silences. The body and mind are always trying to warn us. The problem is that in the rush of modern life, we've learned to ignore those signs, to silence discomfort, to swallow pain with automatic smiles. But that comes at a price, and it's a high one. So here's the invitation: pause, observe yourself, listen, recognize the small alarms before they become total collapse, because the sooner depression is identified, the more effective the path to healing becomes, and that path always begins with attention and compassion. There is a kind of pain that follows almost everyone who faces depression, a pain even more silent and cruel than the psychological suffering itself. It's the guilt of not being okay, a guilt that creeps in like a weed into the mind, distorting perception, destroying self-esteem, slowly corroding any possibility of self-care. Those suffering from depression often don't just deal with sadness, emptiness, or fatigue. They suffer from feeling wrong for feeling this way. They suffer from judging themselves as weak, ungrateful, dramatic. They suffer because they believe they're disappointing others simply by existing. And in this vicious cycle, guilt becomes the disease's fuel. With every self-deprecating thought, depression grows stronger, and the body heavier. The root of this guilt is complex, but often it's planted by the messages we've received since childhood, that crying is weakness, that showing suffering is instability, that we must always be strong, handle it, keep going. These seemingly motivational phrases become, in practice, sentences of condemnation. Because the truth is, no one can handle everything all the time. No one is invulnerable. But when you believe you have to be and you can't, collapse happens. Guilt happens. And it's not just any guilt. It's a guilt that seeps into every decision, every absence, every silence. You start blaming yourself for not being productive enough, for not getting out of bed, for not replying to messages, for not being able to love the way you wish you could. Eventually, even breathing feels wrong. As if simply taking up space in the world is a burden to others, this guilt often blocks the first step toward healing, asking for help. Because in this context, asking for help feels like adding even more weight to those around you. The depressed person thinks, I'm already a problem, I don't want to be a burden too. And so they withdraw, they isolate, they go silent, and when silence sets in, the illness takes more ground. That's why it's so important to understand that the guilt you feel is not your essence. It's a symptom. It's part of how depression hijacks the mind and distorts reality. The truth is, if you are suffering, you deserve care. You deserve to be heard. You deserve treatment. And you are not hurting anyone by being unwell. Quite the opposite. You are showing courage by facing a battle many will never fully understand. But how do you break that cycle of guilt? How do you begin to free yourself from the invisible prison that makes you punish yourself for suffering? The first step is to name what you're feeling, to tell yourself with kindness, I'm not okay, and it's okay to not be okay. Yes, it's okay to not be okay, because denying the pain doesn't make it go away. It makes it grow in the dark. Allowing yourself to feel is the beginning of self-healing. The second step is to remember that emotional illnesses are real illnesses, and there is no shame in having one. Having depression is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of humanity. Just as no one is ashamed to have diabetes or the flu, no one should be ashamed of having a disorder that affects the brain, the hormones, the thoughts, and the emotions. It's the same body, only a different part is affected. Another important step is to practice self-compassion. That might sound strange to someone used to constant self-criticism, but self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It's recognizing your pain without punishing yourself for it. It's treating yourself the way you would treat a dear friend going through the same thing. Would you tell them, you're a burden? Or would you say, you need rest, and I'm here with you? The inner voice we use needs to be transformed. And that doesn't happen overnight. But it begins when we start to listen to ourselves with more love, less judgment, and more honesty. It's also essential to deconstruct the unrealistic expectations you may have built about yourself. The idea that you must be strong all the time, productive every day, cheerful under any circumstance, that is a prison. And it's a socially constructed one. Emotional health is not a constant state of happiness. It's a dynamic balance that includes highs and lows. Allow yourself to have hard days. Allow yourself to slow down. Allow yourself to be human. That doesn't make you any less worthy. It makes you real. And it's in the real world, with its pain and healing, that life truly happens. So if today it feels like even the airways in your lungs, like your mere existence is a bother, like the world would be better off without you, listen closely. That is not true. That is depression's voice. And it lies. It lies about you, about your worth, about your impact on the world. You are not a burden. You are a life in progress, and every life in progress deserves time, care, and love. Breathing is not a mistake. Breathing is an act of courage. And every breath you take, even in pain, is silent proof that there is a strength inside you that you may not even see, but it's there, quietly insisting on continuing. And that strength is yours. There is a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with the presence or absence of people around you. It's a loneliness that lives inside, that settles in even amidst a crowd, even when surrounded by family, friends, or co-workers. It's called emotional loneliness. Perhaps one of the deepest marks of depression. It's invisible to the eye but deeply felt in the chest. It's the feeling of being disconnected from everything and everyone, as if there were an invisible wall between you and the world. You see people laughing, living, making plans, and you feel like a spectator of a play you no longer belong to. And no matter how much others try to reach you, the pain feels incommunicable, as if no words could ever fully explain what you're going through. You don't want to worry anyone, you don't want to be a burden, but deep down you just wish to be understood. This kind of isolation is especially cruel because it's not always a conscious choice. Often, it's a consequence of the depression itself, which gradually erodes the desire to communicate, to open up, to share. You begin pulling away slowly. You cancel a meeting. You stop replying to messages. You pretend everything's fine. And without realizing it, you retreat into a shell that, while it may protect you, also imprisons you. And the longer you stay in that shell, the harder it becomes to come out. The world outside starts to feel distant, noisy, incomprehensible. People seem too happy, too busy, too light, and you too heavy to be seen. There's also the difficulty of truly being heard. In a fast-paced world where everything must be solved quickly, those who suffer from depression often find themselves surrounded by ready-made answers, automatic advice, and cliched phrases. This will pass. You just need to get out more. Go to the gym. It'll help. And even when intentions are good, the effect can be devastating, because what someone with depression truly longs for isn't a quick fix. It's genuine compassion. It's someone who says, "I may not fully understand how you feel, but I'm here, and I'll stay with you." When that kind of empathetic listening doesn't happen, the pain grows. Being ignored is painful, but being misunderstood can be even worse. Emotional loneliness can also appear in our closest relationships, partners, family, children. They may be physically close, but emotionally distant, sometimes because they don't know how to help, sometimes because they feel powerless. And this distance creates a cruel cycle. The person with depression feels misunderstood and withdraws. Those around feel pushed away and grow frustrated. And in the end, everyone loses a little piece of each other. In that relational void, many begin to believe they're not needed, that the world would carry on just fine without them, that disappearing would be a relief for everyone. These dangerous and distorted thoughts are fed by isolation. That's why the reconnection is one of the most important steps toward healing. But how do you reconnect when everything in you wants to hide? How do you come out of isolation when even the idea of talking feels exhausting? The answer isn't in grand gestures. It lies in how small steps. Maybe replying to that message from someone you love. Maybe saying yes to an invitation, even for just a short while. Maybe opening up to one person who feels safe. And if there's no one at the moment, reaching out to a therapist can be the beginning of a new bridge. Because a therapist isn't there to judge or rush you. They're there to listen deeply, to sit with you in the darkness until you can find your own light again. Another important step is allowing yourself to belong to the world again, slowly, without guilt, without pressure, participating in small social rituals, even without enthusiasm. Rebuilding old connections or creating new ones based on true affinity, not obligation. The loneliness of depression is real, but it's not permanent. There is always a thread of connection that can be rewoven, and often that thread starts within, reconnecting with yourself, your story, your pain, but also with your hope, because no matter how hard depression tries to convince you that you're alone, you're not. There are many others who've stood at this same edge and found their way back. There are hands reaching out even if you can't see them yet. There are people who will understand, maybe not perfectly but with an open heart. And above all, there is a future where you'll feel like you belong again. Belonging to the world, to conversations, to relationships, to life. Depression may isolate you, but connection can heal you. And every time you allow yourself to be seen, heard, and held, you take one step away from the pain. You begin, little by little, to return home. the home that was always yours, yourself. The pain of depression, although often silent and without an obvious cause, does not appear out of nowhere. It has roots, and those roots are sometimes buried so deep that we only notice them when we are already completely overtaken by their effects. Many cases of depression are connected to old stories, unhealed emotional wounds, silent traumas, unresolved losses, or experiences that were ignored, repressed, or minimized throughout life. Human beings are made of memory, and emotional memory doesn't forget. What the body doesn't cry out, the mind stores. What the heart doesn't process, the unconscious transforms into symptoms. And so, an event that seems far away can continue to quietly shape how we see ourselves, how we feel, and how we live. Psychological trauma, whether explicit or subtle, is one of the deepest roots of depression. A trauma doesn't need to be something big or violent to leave lasting marks. It can be a rejection in childhood, an abandonment, a humiliation, or a deep sense of not being seen or valued. It can be a childhood marked by constant criticism, lack of affection, or impossible expectations. These are experiences that slowly erode self-esteem and leave a wound in the sense of belonging. And when those wounds go unhealed, they turn into limiting beliefs and patterns of self-sabotage. The person grows up feeling they're not good enough, that they'll never be truly loved, that they have to work too hard just to be accepted. And when those beliefs collapse, depression finds an opening. Grief, in turn, is another frequent source. But not all grief comes from physical death. Sometimes we grieve a lost love, a shattered dream, a version of ourselves we can no longer be. Grief is the pain of losing something that mattered. And when that grief isn't processed with presence and support, it can turn into chronic sadness, an inner emptiness that accumulates alongside other wounds. Grief that is denied or rushed becomes heavy, because the soul needs time to say goodbye. And when that time isn't honored, the sadness remains stuck, shaping how we see the future. It's as if part of us is still frozen in the past, trying to process what never got to be lived. Then there are the unemotional breaks. Those experiences that shatter the foundations of trust and safety that hold our identity together. A betrayal, a sudden job loss, a tough medical diagnosis, abuse, or an abrupt breakup. Any of these can break something inside. And if that break isn't met with care and time, it turns into chronic pain. The person starts living in a constant state of alert, fear, and withdrawal. And that state, when prolonged, leads to emotional exhaustion. It's as if the body is saying, I can't live on high alert anymore. And with that, the spiral of depression begins. There's also a kind of pain that few people recognize as legitimate. The pain of the unlived. The silent mourning for all that should have been, but wasn't. For all the times you stayed quiet to please others, hid yourself so you wouldn't be a burden, gave up on yourself to meet someone else's expectations. This pain is subtle, but devastating. It accumulates over the years, and one day it erupts as a deep void. You may not even know exactly what you lost, but you feel that something essential is missing. That feeling of disconnection from yourself is one of the most frequently described experiences by those going through depression. The sense of having lost your way, of no longer knowing who you are. That's why a fundamental part of the therapeutic journey is to look back, not to remain trapped in the past, but to understand how the past still lives within you. It's about recognizing the wounds you've carried alone for too long, naming the pains that were ignored, challenging the inner voices that repeat inherited lies, and beginning, little by little, to rewrite your story with more truth and less blame. Self-knowledge isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's a process of healing. And every healing journey begins with recognition, validation, and care. And maybe now you're asking yourself, but how do I do that? Where do I start? The answer lies in listening. Listening to your own story with empathy, not judgment. Allowing yourself to remember with compassion, not condemnation. Seeking professional help can be the starting point to organize those memories, to understand the connections between what you've lived and what you feel now. Psychotherapy offers that safe space where your story can finally be fully heard. No rush, no censorship, with depth. You are not weak for having wounds, you are human, and for that very reason, you are capable of healing. The roots of your pain no longer have to define your present. They can be understood, cared for, and gradually transformed. And what once was a source of suffering can become the starting point for rebuilding. Because no matter how deep the scars may be, it is always possible to bloom, even after the most painful falls. Among all forms of psychological suffering, perhaps the most deceptive is the one that hides behind a smile. Masked depression is one of the most silent and dangerous expressions of the illness. It doesn't scream, it doesn't show up in tears, it disguises itself as normality. And because of that, it goes unnoticed, even by the person carrying it. It's depression that wears makeup, that goes to work, meets deadlines, socializes, and even laughs. But inside, there's a deep emptiness, immense fatigue, and a constant feeling that everything could fall apart at any moment. It's like living inside a heavy suit of armor. You appear strong on the outside, but you're exhausted on the inside. Many people with this kind of depression are seen as strong, well put together, the ones who always help others. They're the ones who never miss work, who are always smiling in pictures, who maintain the appearance of success and balance. But at night, when the door closes and the mask can come off, what remains is silence. A silence filled with pain, negative thoughts, anxiety, insomnia, and crushing loneliness. The shame of admitting they're not okay is as strong as the fear of disappointing others. So, they continue playing a role that exhausts, that imprisons, that slowly makes them sicker. This form of depression is especially common among people who learned early on not to show weakness, people who were told things like, "Stop crying, don't play the victim, everyone has problems," people who learn to take care of others but never learn to care for themselves, who internalize the idea that asking for help is a sign of weakness and that showing vulnerability makes you a burden. And so, even when they're falling apart inside, they keep smiling. They work more, produce more, stay busy, and deep down all of this is a desperate attempt to avoid facing what hurts, the feeling of not being enough, the fear of failure, the existential emptiness that consumes them. But this illusion of normalcy comes at a high cost. The body begins to send signals: recurring aches, extreme fatigue, anxiety attacks, persistent insomnia, appetite changes, lack of libido. The mind begins to collapse. Difficulty concentrating, constant irritability, memory lapses, intrusive thoughts. Little by little, the mask begins to crack, and even then, many keep pretending. Because admitting they're not okay would mean deconstructing an identity they spent years building. And for someone who has always been the strong one, the example, the happy one, that feels unthinkable. That's why so many people with masked depression only seek help when collapse becomes unavoidable, when the body gives out, when panic takes over, when the idea of pretending becomes unbearable. And even then, they feel guilty for asking for help. They feel ashamed for not being invincible. But here's a truth that must be said clearly. You don't have to wait for a breakdown to ask for help. You don't have to let everything fall apart. You don't have to be strong all the time. You have the right to be cared for. You have the right to show up as you are, without masks, without perfection, without performance. So how do you identify this silent form of depression in yourself or someone close to you? Start by paying attention to the small signs. The person who always says "I'm fine" with an automatic smile, but has been quieter lately. The one who avoids talking about themselves, but is always available for others. The one who cries secretly in the bathroom, but comes back to the room smiling. The one who is always too busy, too productive, too cheerful, as if they're running from themselves. And if that person is you, stop for a moment and ask yourself, what happens when no one is watching? The answer might be the beginning of your freedom. Taking off the mask is hard, it's scary, but it also brings relief. Because living in disguise is a burden no one should carry. When you allow yourself to be real, vulnerable, and human, you open the door to healing, and you discover you're not alone, that there are people ready to listen, that there are professionals prepared to help, that there is a path forward, and that path begins the moment you find the courage to say, "I'm not okay, but I want to be." And that alone is already an act of immense strength. Inside every person, there is a voice that whispers constantly all the time, even when everything around seems quiet. It's the voice of the mind, that uninterrupted flow of thoughts that interprets, judges, comments, and often hurts. For someone living with depression, this inner voice can become a daily torment. It doesn't scream, but it wounds. It doesn't push, but it pulls you down. It says things like, You're not good enough. You're worthless, and you're just in the way. Nobody cares about you. No one could ever love you like this. And no matter how irrational these thoughts may seem, when repeated often enough, they become internalized as absolute truths. Truths that imprison, that limit, that quietly destroy self-esteem, personal value, and the ability to react. These self-destructive mental patterns don't come from nowhere. They are built over time, often starting in childhood, through negative experiences, hurtful words, trauma, and critical environments. Phrases spoken by figures of authority, parents, teachers, caregivers, can turn into deeply rooted internal beliefs. A repeated "you're useless" in childhood becomes a constant "I am useless" in adulthood. A "no one likes you" becomes "I'm impossible to love." These thoughts, known as negative core beliefs, act like distorted lenses through which a person sees the world and themselves. And the longer these beliefs stay unchecked, the harder it becomes to recognize them as distortions. They start to feel like identity, as if that's who I am, but they are not. These thoughts are not you. They are internal programs that can be rewritten. And this is the essential role of therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which focuses on identifying, questioning, and replacing these dysfunctional patterns. CBT teaches that our thoughts directly affect our emotions and behaviors. So if you believe you're a failure, you'll feel unmotivated and avoid challenges. If you believe you're a burden, you'll isolate yourself and reject help. If you believe you're unlovable, you'll settle for emotional crumbs or avoid connections out of fear of rejection. The mind creates the cycle, and the cycle reinforces the depression. So how do you break that cycle? First, by recognizing it exists. Self-awareness is the beginning of transformation. Start observing your thoughts from the outside like a spectator. Every time a negative thought arises, ask yourself, is this absolutely true? Would I say this to someone I love? Often, you'll realize that you treat yourself far more harshly than you'd ever treat anyone else. And that has to change. Self-compassion here isn't a luxury. It's a vital need. You must learn to speak to yourself with more kindness, more patience, more humanity. A powerful technique used in therapy is the automatic thought record. Write down whenever possible the negative thoughts that arise during your day. Then analyze them with logic, with reason, using key questions. What is the real evidence for this thought? Is there another explanation for what happened? What would I tell a friend who was thinking this? This practice, when done consistently, starts to create cracks in the rigidity of destructive beliefs. It begins to show that not everything the mind says is true. And this realization, simple as it may seem, is incredibly liberating. It's essential to remember that our mind is not the enemy. It's trying, in its own way, to protect us from pain. But when it carries unresolved stories, unhealed trauma, and misunderstood fears, it ends up hurting us more than helping. That's why we need to retrain it. We need to teach the mind that there are other ways to interpret reality. We must show it that we can make mistakes without being failures, that we can be vulnerable without being weak, that we can be imperfect and still worthy of love. This process is neither fast nor easy, but it is possible. And every time you challenge a destructive thought, you take one step toward healing. Finally, remember this: you are not alone. All of us, to some extent, have a critical inner voice. What varies is the volume, the frequency, the intensity with which it appears, and how much we believe it. Learning to distinguish truth from self-sabotage is one of the greatest achievements of therapy. And when you start to realize that the voice saying, "you won't make it," was wrong, then something begins to change. Because the same mind that destroys can also be taught to build. The same mind that makes you sick can also learn how to heal. And that new beginning starts here now with one simple phrase: I am not what my pain says I am. Imagine living with a mind torn between two opposing extremes, equally oppressive. On one side, anxiety, which speeds up, agitates, anticipates, demands. On the other, depression, which slows down, empties, dims, paralyzes. For many people, these two states not only coexist, they intertwine, feed off each other, blur together, and together create an exhausting cycle that feels impossible to break. Anxiety pushes you forward with fear of the future, while depression pulls you backward with the weight of the past and present. And in the middle, there you are, tired, overwhelmed, trying to survive the internal chaos of a body that wants to run and a soul that just wants to disappear. This coexistence between anxiety and depression is more common than one might think. Studies show that more than half of those diagnosed with depression also exhibit symptoms of anxiety. And it's not hard to understand why. Anxiety, when constant and dysregulated, wears down the nervous system, overloads the mind with catastrophic thoughts, and drains vital energy. Over time, this emotional exhaustion can pave the way for depression. Conversely, depression, with its apathy, hopelessness, and disconnection, generates insecurity, fear of action, fear of failure, thus feeding the anxiety. It's a vicious cycle. Anxiety keeps you overly alert. Depression leaves you without strength. One demands action, the other paralyzes movement. The symptoms of this dual condition are intense and often confusing. In the body, tremors, sweating, shortness of breath, muscle tension, heart palpitations, and diffuse pain arise. In the mind, repetitive negative thoughts, an impending sense of panic, difficulty concentrating, constant fear of failure, feelings of incapacity and hopelessness, and the impact on daily life is brutal. Working, studying, socializing, sleeping, everything becomes a superhuman effort. A person may wake up anxious, spend the day in a state of alert, and go to bed feeling sad, guilty, and exhausted. Or they may not even be able to sleep because the mind won't stop. It gets stuck in cycles of fear, frustration, negative predictions, and self-criticism, and this exhaustion keeps building until the mind and body collapse. What's hardest is that to the outside world, everything often seems fine. The person keeps dressing well, going to work, posting on social media, but inside they're imploding because no one sees the panic attack that happened in the office bathroom. No one sees the silent crying before bed. No one sees the internal struggle to not give up on everything. And this invisibility intensifies the suffering because pain that isn't acknowledged tends to grow. The person begins to believe they are exaggerating, that they're weak, that no one will understand. And so they isolate even more. Anxiety demands explanations, depression prevents speaking, and loneliness takes root. But here is something essential that must be said. This duo is treatable, and there is a way out. When properly diagnosed, anxiety and depression respond very well to therapy, appropriate medication, and lifestyle changes. One of the first steps to healing is precisely understanding what's happening, naming the enemy, realizing that you are not going crazy, that your symptoms have an explanation, that your suffering is valid, and that you deserve help. Psychotherapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, is extremely effective in these cases. It helps identify triggers, reorganize thoughts, develop practical strategies for coping with crises, and build a new thought model, more realistic, more compassionate, more balanced. In addition, caring for the body becomes essential. Breathing techniques, light physical exercise, a balanced diet, good sleep hygiene. All of this, though it may seem simple, has a deep impact on emotional regulation. When the body starts to feel safe, the mind tends to follow. Gradually, the negative cycle can be replaced with a new one of care, of lightness, of rebuilding. It's not about eliminating anxiety or erasing depression as if they were flaws. It's about learning to live with them in a healthier, more conscious, more balanced way. It's also important to talk about time. Healing is not immediate. There will be days when everything feels worse. There will be relapses. There will be frustrations. But there will also be progress. There will be moments of relief, moments when the mind slows down, when the heart finds rhythm, when the body relaxes. And these moments are signs that it's working, that even if you don't see it yet, something inside you is beginning to heal. And that's all that matters, to keep going, even slowly, even afraid, even in pain, because every step you take is an act of resistance, an act of love, a sign that you still believe, or want to believe again, that it's possible to live more lightly. You are not your anxiety. You are not your depression. You are the one in the middle of it all, trying day after day to find a little peace. And that in itself is an immense strength. You are not alone. You are not broken. And yes, you will find your way back to yourself. When people talk about depression, the focus is almost always on the mind. Negative thoughts, deep sadness, hopelessness. But the body, that sensitive, complex and living territory, also feels, and it feels deeply. Depression does not occur only on a psychological level. It affects the entire organism. One of the clearest signs of its presence lies in visible and persistent physical changes, which are often ignored, treated in isolation, or mistaken for other illnesses. That's why understanding how depression manifests in the body is essential to recognize what's happening, and more importantly, to validate that physical pain is also emotional pain. The body in its own way is simply trying to express what the soul can no longer bear alone. Let's begin with sleep. One of the first and most intensely affected areas. Depression can cause chronic insomnia, in which a person has trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or wakes up in the middle of the night with distressing thoughts. There are also those who sleep for hours on end and still wake up exhausted, as if the sleep had not been restorative. This happens because depression alters the architecture of sleep. Deep cycles are interrupted, dreams become more intense and disturbing, and the brain remains in a state of alert even while the body rests. It's as if resting ceases to be natural, and without quality sleep, the entire bodily system collapses. The immune system weakens, concentration disappears, mood swings occur, and the exhaustion cycle feeds itself. Another clear impact occurs in appetite and eating habits. Some people completely lose the desire to eat. Food loses its taste, texture becomes unpleasant, and the simple act of preparing or chewing feels overwhelmingly demanding. The body begins to lose weight, often rapidly, leading to overall weakness. On the other hand, some develop binge eating, not for pleasure but as an unconscious attempt to fill an internal void. They seek out calorie-dense, sugary, heavy foods in the hope of emotional relief that never comes. After the excess, guilt follows, and that guilt reinforces the pain cycle. Both overeating and loss of appetite are valid expressions of the body trying to deal with an internal collapse it doesn't know how to manage. And then there is physical pain. Yes, real physical pain. Many people with depression report muscle aches, constant migraines, neck and shoulder tension, a sensation of heaviness in the limbs, and extreme fatigue. This pain is not just in their head. It is physiological. Depression alters the functioning of neurotransmitters like serotonin and norepinephrine, which, among other roles, regulate pain perception. When these levels are imbalanced, pain intensifies. That's why someone may undergo every possible medical test and find no organic cause for their pain, and still feel immense suffering. The body is not making up symptoms, it is crying for help. Constant exhaustion is another hallmark symptom. A fatigue that doesn't go away, that doesn't improve with rest, that becomes a daily companion. Getting out of bed feels like a Herculean task. Taking a shower requires planning. Talking to someone demands emotional effort. Working, studying, doing household chores, everything becomes a burden. A depressed person is not lazy, they are depleted. And this depletion is not a character flaw, it's biological. It's as if the nervous system is constantly overwhelmed, fighting to keep basic functions running amidst an internal collapse. And the more the person pressures themselves, the more the body resists. Because the body just wants to stop, just wants silence, just wants to breathe in peace. We must break the myth that mental health and physical health are separate things. They're not. They constantly influence each other. Depression is a brain illness, but its effects spread throughout the body. Acknowledging these effects is a way to validate the suffering of those going through it, to offer support without judgment. To understand that a coworker who is frequently absent may be experiencing severe pain episodes, that a family member who only wants to sleep might be fleeing from tormenting thoughts, that a partner who's lost sexual interest may be dealing with a deep imbalance that has nothing to do with love, and everything to do with the collapse of vital energy. The body is wise. It always tries to warn us. The question is, are we listening? Are we respecting its limits? Are we offering it the care it needs or just demanding performance? In a culture that values productivity above all, rest has become a sin, and that makes us sick. That's why caring for the body during depression is not a luxury. It's a survival strategy. Eating well, moving gently, seeking activities that offer sensory pleasure, cultivating simple and predictable routines, all of this is part of the treatment. All of this is part of the healing. Your body is not betraying you. It is trying to protect you. And when you start treating it as an ally instead of an enemy, something within you begins to change. The body does not forget pain, but it can also remember care, affection, and the beginning of something new. And it's in that beginning, no matter how slow, that life begins to rebuild from the inside out. One step at a time, one breath at a time, one gentle touch at a time. Perhaps the most devastating trait of depression is not sadness, pain, or exhaustion, but rather hopelessness. The near total absence of perspective, the feeling that the future doesn't exist, or if it does, it will only be a grey and unbearable repetition of the present. For those who have never faced deep depression, it is difficult to understand what it means to look ahead and see nothing. No plans, no desires, no dreams, just a void, a silence, a darkness. It feels like living in an endless tunnel where time has lost its rhythm and days drag on as if they were eternal. The mind enters a state of suspension. Nothing seems to matter. Nothing seems to make sense. And the most frightening part is that in this state, a question begins to arise more and more persistently. What's the point of continuing? This is the most dangerous route of depression, because when hope is lost, the energy to fight is lost as well. And without struggle, without motion, without perspective, the desire to disappear begins to take over. Not necessarily with immediate thoughts of death, but with the wish not to exist, to sleep and never wake up, to vanish quietly, to stop feeling. Hopelessness manifests as a silent surrender to relationships, to projects, to self-care, to the will to live. And the outside world often doesn't notice, because there's still functionality. The person still shows up, still replies to messages, still smiles once in a while, but inside, they are already gone. They merely exist. They no longer live. Hopelessness is fueled by automatic, destructive thoughts like, nothing will ever change. This pain will never go away. No matter what I do, I'll always fail. No one will ever truly understand me. These are repetitive, circular thoughts that create a mental labyrinth from which it seems impossible to escape. And the cruelest part is that the more a person believes these ideas, the more the world seems to confirm them. Plans fail. Relationships deteriorate. The body weakens. The prophecy fulfills itself, not because it was true, but because the mind was already conditioned to that outcome. That's the power of hopelessness. It doesn't just destroy the vision of the future, it distorts the present, preventing the person from seeing any possibility of change. But here's a truth that needs to be said with strength, even if it's hard to believe. Hopelessness is a symptom, not a sentence. It is a dirty lens placed over your eyes by depression. It is not reality. It is a distortion of your ability to imagine a future. And like any symptom, it can be treated, it can be reframed, it can be dismantled with time, care, and professional help. It's not you who is out of options, it's your mind temporarily that is out of light. And that can change. Yes, it can. Because there is a deep wisdom in life that insists on continuing, even when you can't see the reason. And that strength is still within you, even if it's silent right now. Rebuilding hope does not happen magically. It begins with small recoveries of meaning. Sometimes it's a moment of calm in the chaos, a gesture of affection, a piece of music that touches something forgotten inside you, a sincere look, a conversation with someone who truly listens, a moment where, for a brief instant, the pain softens. These moments are seeds, and every seed, no matter how small, carries within it the possibility of a new world. The therapeutic process helps find those seeds, helps identify what still pulses, what still holds value, what can be rebuilt. Because even after everything, there is still something worth living for. Even when broken, the heart can still love. Even when tired, the body can still revive. Even when wounded, the spirit can still bloom. Hope, more often than not, is not a scream, it's a whisper. And maybe today you still can't hear it, but it's there. It's in the places that pain hasn't fully occupied yet. It's in the part of you that is listening to this text right now. It's in the decision to keep going, even without knowing why. And all of this is already a beginning, already a seed. Hopelessness lies. And the truth is that you didn't come this far to give up now. Your story doesn't end in the middle of the tunnel. Your story continues, and it can indeed be rewritten with time, with support, with love, with courage. If today you can't see the future, that's okay. Together, we'll build it. One step at a time, one breath at a time, one choice for life at a time. There is a subtle lie, deeply rooted in many of our cultures, that says asking for help is a sign of weakness. A lie disguised as pride, independence, strength. But deep down it imprisons, sickens, and isolates. How many times have you found yourself thinking you needed to solve everything alone, that no one would understand, that speaking about your pain would be exposing too much, that seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist would mean admitting defeat? These ideas, repeated like mantras, don't come out of nowhere. They are learned, inherited, and reinforced by a society that still values performance over emotional truth. But here is a reality that can change your life. Asking for help is not weakness. It is one of the greatest acts of courage there is. Admitting that you're not okay, that something inside you needs care, is deeply challenging. It requires humility, yes, but more than that, it requires humanity. It means confronting the fear of judgment, the fear of being labeled, the weight of stigma. Some still think therapy is for the weak, that medication is a crutch, that in my grandmother's day this didn't exist. But what they might not know is that these very ideas are part of the problem. These are the beliefs that lead so many to suffer in silence, to stay quiet, to give up, to try and carry it all alone until they can't anymore. Treatment exists to save lives, and the sooner you allow yourself to receive help, the more likely you are to rebuild your path. Seeking a professional help means entering a space of qualified listening, trained to understand what lies behind the pain. It's talking to someone who's not there to judge, to give unsolicited advice or quick fixes, but to listen, map, investigate, and together find a way forward. Psychotherapy is a space for reconstruction, a space where you can say what you've never said to anyone, where you can be who you are, without masks, without pressure. It is there that you begin to understand that your pain makes sense, that your patterns have origins, that your reactions are human, and more than that, it's where you begin to remember who you are, beyond the pain, beyond the crisis. And when needed, psychiatric cares can also be a powerful ally. Medications, when properly prescribed, are precious tools. They don't solve everything on their own, but they can be the bridge between collapse and deeper psychological treatment. They can stabilize mood, ease anxiety, restore sleep, regulate appetite, and recover vital energy. And no, they're not forever. And yes, they can be tapered off over time with supervision. The most important thing to understand is that there is no weakness in using a tool designed to help you survive. Taking an antidepressant is like wearing glasses. If your vision is blurred, you use support until you can see clearly again. And that is self-care, not weakness. Of course, for many people, taking that first step still feels impossible. Sometimes due to lack of resources, sometimes due to fear, or due to past disappointments. But the truth is, there are ways. Today, there are free psychological services at universities, at public health centers, at non-profits. There are online platforms, support groups, social media networks connecting people with the same challenges. It's not easy, but it's possible, and every attempt is valid. Because finding the right therapist is like finding a home within yourself, someone who welcomes the mess without rushing to fix it, someone who walks with you at whatever pace is possible. Asking for help is also recognizing your own worth. It is saying, through your actions, I deserve to live better. I deserve to understand my story. I deserve support. And that, for someone who has spent a lifetime feeling invisible, guilty, or inadequate, is revolutionary. It's liberating. It's the first step on a journey that does not promise instant solutions, but does promise truth. And truth heals, because when you allow yourself to be cared for, you begin to discover that there is much more inside you than pain. There is strength, there is emotional intelligence, there is the ability to love, to start over, to rebuild. You don't have to wait to hit rock bottom. You don't need to reach complete exhaustion. You don't need to be in really bad shape to seek treatment. You can and should ask for help while you still can. And if today you're at that point of doubt, in that moment where something inside you whispers, I can't go on like this, listen to that voice. It's your life instinct asking for space. It's your inner wisdom whispering that there's still time. And there is. There always is. Treatment is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of a new path. A lighter, more conscious, freer path. And as terrifying as that first step may seem, it is the most important one, because it tells the world and yourself that your life matters, that your pain matters, and that you are ready, even afraid, to begin rebuilding. Imagine if it were possible to teach your own brain to see the world differently. Imagine if there were a way to stop that whirlwind of negative, paralyzing and self-destructive thoughts spinning in circles inside your mind every single day. Imagine if you could, little by little, learn to respond differently to the same triggers that have always knocked you down. Well, that possibility exists, and its name is cognitive behavioral therapy, or simply GPT, one of the most effective and transformative therapeutic approaches for treating depression, anxiety, and so many other emotional disorders. And it's not just a type of conversation. It is a deep, reprogramming tool for the mind, grounded in science, empathy, and practice. CBT is based on a simple but powerful premise. Our subconscious thoughts affect our emotions and behaviors. In other words, the way we interpret life events directly impacts how we feel and act. Two people might go through the exact same situation, say, not being called in for a job interview, and react in completely different ways. One might think, they probably picked someone with more experience and that's okay, I'll keep trying. The other might think, of course, I'm never good enough. No one will ever give me a chance. I'm a failure. This second way of thinking is what CBT calls a high dysfunctional thought, a distorted, often automatic mental pattern that creates unnecessary suffering. These dysfunctional thoughts don't come out of nowhere. They're rooted in negative core beliefs, deep-seated ideas we carry about ourselves, about others, and about the world. Beliefs like I'm worthless, people will abandon me, the world is dangerous, no one really cares about me. CBT helps us identify these beliefs, understand where they came from, how they were formed, and more importantly, how to deconstruct them. The process isn't quick, but it is deeply liberating, because when you change the way you think, you also change the way you feel and act. What once seemed like the end of the world becomes just a temporary obstacle. What once felt like complete failure is now seen as an experience, an attempt, a lesson. In practice, CBT is active. You won't just talk and be heard. You'll learn techniques, do exercises, record thoughts, observe patterns, and practice new ways to respond to life's challenges. One common tool is the automatic thought record, where you write down a difficult situation, the thoughts that came up at the time, the emotions you felt, and then analyze the accuracy of those thoughts through guided questions. This simple habit, done consistently, begins to break the power of destructive thinking. You start to see yourself with more clarity, more compassion, more objectivity. Another essential tool in CBT is the behavioral experiment. Often we avoid certain situations because we believe we can't handle them, which reinforces the belief in our own incapacity. The therapist then proposes small, gradual, safe challenges to test those beliefs. For example, if you believe people will reject me if I speak in public, CBT might suggest reading a short text aloud to a friend. Then you analyze the experience. What really happened? Did people reject you? Or did they listen respectfully? This process, repeated over time, weakens the old belief and builds a new one. I can do it. And little by little, confidence returns. Autonomy grows stronger. The mind learns to live again. CBT also offers direct support for smart action planning, organizing routines, managing physical symptoms, handling anxiety attacks, preventing relapses, and creating life goals. All of this is done collaboratively, with the therapist as a partner, not an authority figure. You are the protagonist of your healing. The therapist is the guide walking beside you, with tools in hand and listening in their heart. And perhaps the most beautiful part of cognitive behavioral therapy is realizing over time that you can build new connections in your brain. This isn't just a metaphor. Neuroscience has proven that the brain has plasticity. It can be shaped, trained, and restructured. With effort and repetition, new circuits are formed. And what once seemed impossible, thinking more gently, feeling less guilt, having more clarity, reacting with more balance, starts to feel natural. The pain doesn't vanish overnight, but it begins to take up less space, and in its place, new possibilities arise. You are not a prisoner of your mind. You can train it, reprogram it, free it. CBT doesn't offer magic. It offers method. It offers clarity. It offers results. And above all, it offers hope. Not vague or romantic hope, but the real grounded hope of knowing there is a path, and that you're already walking it, right now, with every thought you start to question, with every new step you allow yourself to take, with every session where you choose, with courage, to face what's hurting you. Because in the end, your brain doesn't want to punish you. It wants to protect you. It just needs, like any system, to be taught how to do that the right way. And you can. You will. You are already doing it. Few things evoke as much fear, doubt, and prejudice as the idea of using medication to treat depression. Perhaps you've heard phrases like medicine is for crazy people, you'll get addicted, that's only for those who lack willpower, or even you'll get better on your own with time. These statements, unfortunately, are echoes of an old and dangerous stigma that prevents thousands of people from receiving proper treatment. And the most serious part is that without the right treatment, depression can worsen, and in some cases, be fatal. That's why it must be said clearly and firmly, medications save lives. And when well prescribed and monitored by a responsible professional, they can be the most crucial support during a crisis. Medication for depression, especially antidepressants, acts directly on the brain neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, which are responsible for regulating mood, sleep, appetite, concentration, and vital energy. In depression, these neurotransmitters are out of balance, and this imbalance is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign that your body is in pain. It's a biological condition, and like any biological condition, it can and should be treated with the available resources. Antidepressants don't create addiction, as many people fear. They do not cause chemical dependency, like recreational drugs or misused tranquilizers. They work progressively, regulating brain functions, and can be safely discontinued under medical supervision once emotional stability is restored. It's important to understand that medication is not a magic solution. It doesn't cure depression on its own. It does not replace therapy or lifestyle changes, but it provides something fundamental: stability. When the pain is so intense you can't think clearly, when your body is so exhausted it barely reacts, when your thoughts are too dark to allow any initiative, the medication steps in as a chemical support that restores the minimum needed for the person to begin treatment. It's like a walker for someone who broke their legs. You won't use it forever, but without it you might not even be able to stand up and begin rehabilitation. And yes, every medication has potential side effects. That's true. There may be nausea in the first weeks, changes in sleep, libido, headaches, or an uncomfortable adaptation period, but these effects are, in most cases, temporary and subside after the first few weeks. And even when they persist, they can be adjusted through dosage changes or medication switches, always under psychiatric supervision. Each body responds differently. That's why it's essential to have a trusted professional, someone you can talk to openly without fear or shame. The psychiatrist's role is not just to prescribe, it's to monitor your progress, evaluate your response, and build the best care plan with you. Another common myth is that by taking medication, a person will stop being themselves, as if they were doped, anesthetized, or depersonalized. This is not true. When properly adjusted, medication does not erase your personality. On the contrary, it restores who you were before the pain took over. It allows you to feel pleasure again, to gain clarity, to experience the world with more lightness. And that in itself is already a new beginning, because depression steals your identity, and restoring the brain's chemical balance is a way to reclaim your essence. It's also important to remember that, in many cases, medication is temporary. It might be used for a few months or a year or two until the person becomes emotionally and psychologically stronger. In other cases, especially when depression is recurrent, it might be used long-term, and that's okay. Just as there are people who take insulin to live well with diabetes, there are those who need antidepressants for longer to maintain emotional balance. What matters is not how long it lasts, but how your quality of life is today. Can you get out of bed, leave the house, feel joy in small things again, start planning the future? These are the signs that truly matter. Seeking medication is an act of courage. It's admitting that you deserve to live better. That you don't have to keep fighting alone, that your pain is real and you're willing to face it with every resource available. And more than that, it's understanding that taking care of your mind is just as important as taking care of your body. If you take antibiotics for an infection, why would you hesitate to take an antidepressant for a chemical breakdown in your brain? Emotional suffering isn't lesser. It's invisible, yes, but just as real as any physical pain. So if you're considering starting medication, or if you've already begun and feel fear, insecurity, or guilt, breathe. Look kindly at this step. Talk to your doctor. Ask questions. Read with discernment. And above all, allow yourself to receive help. Because sometimes what we lack to begin healing is simply giving ourselves permission to be cared for. And when that happens, it can change everything. There is something profoundly healing about hearing the story of someone who has been through what you're going through right now and made it out the other side. In the midst of the darkness of depression, when everything seems meaningless, when each day is a silent battle against thoughts that hurt, hearing that it is possible to overcome can feel like a sliver of light in the tunnel. And not an illusory, distant light, but a real one, born from pain, from collapse, from hitting rock bottom, but also from courage, rebuilding, and persistence. Because yes, there are stories of recovery, and there are many, and they are real. These stories are not made of magical turnarounds or fairy tale endings. They are made of slow steps, of hard days, of relapses, of interrupted and resumed therapy, of medications that had to be adjusted many times, of people who thought about giving up and yet kept going, of bodies that were exhausted but still moved, of minds that saw only chaos but allowed themselves to open up, even just a little. And in that little, they found the beginning of change. Stories of ordinary people, like you, who one day couldn't get out of bed, who cried without knowing why, who felt ashamed of being alive, who believed they would never again feel joy, desire, or purpose, and who today, with highs and lows, have rebuilt their lives. One of these people is Camilla, 29 years old, who faced deep depression after an abusive relationship and years of silencing herself. She shares that for nearly 2 years, she lived like a functional ghost, going to work, smiling for family, posting filtered photos, but crying every day in the shower, hiding anxiety attacks behind excuses, and relying on medication to sleep. When she reached the point where she couldn't get up for work anymore, she sought help. She started therapy. She resisted, thought it wouldn't work, but she continued, tried different therapists until she felt safe, began medication, read, studied, cried, and one day she realized that pain had made room for something else, desire, a desire to live. Today, Camilla doesn't say she's cured, but she says with conviction that she knows herself better, respects herself more, and will never silence her pain again. Another story is Leandro, 47 years old, father of 2, who went through depression after losing his job and falling into debt. Always seen as the strong one in the family, he couldn't admit he was struggling. He felt ashamed, tried to keep up with his routine, but inside, everything was collapsing. He began having intrusive thoughts, questioning his worth as a man, as a father, as a human being. When suicidal thoughts emerged, he sought psychiatric help, joined a support group, found strength in other men who were also allowing themselves to feel, and rediscovered the value of vulnerability. Today, with stable work and still in therapy, Leandro says his greatest victory wasn't getting a new job. It was learning to listen to himself and allowing himself to start over, even while broken. There are also public stories, public figures who use their voices to show that mental health is serious. Singer Choro, from the band Charlie Brown Jr., spoke intensely about his pain, though many only realized too late. Others, like actress Emma Stone, swimmer Michael Phelps, and singer Lady Gaga, openly share their struggles with depression, anxiety, and emotional disorders. They are not exceptions. They are simply voices that stood up to say, "Me too," and that "me too" can be the beginning of a healing chain, because when one person shares their pain truthfully, they give others permission to recognize themselves and seek help. The truth is, no one overcomes depression alone. Every recovery story includes, at some point, a support network, even a small one, a therapist, a friend, a grandmother, a group, a book, a voice note that made sense, a video that touched something inside, a gesture that saved. And that network doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be real, present, kind. And the good news is, you can build yours too. Slowly, patiently, with care, with openness. If you're reading this and feeling far from any hope of recovery, I get it. I know that at this point, everything may feel distant, unreachable, impossible. But know this, no one believes they'll get better at first. Most people only begin to improve because they chose to keep going, even without believing. And after some time, something shifts. A small victory happens, a lighter morning, an unexpected laugh, a moment of peace. And looking back, you realize there was healing, even in pieces, even with scars. Pain is part of the journey, but it's not the final destination. You are in process, in reconstruction. And just like Camilla, Leandro, and so many others, you can also write your story of healing. It doesn't have to be perfect or fast, but it does need to be yours. And it already began, the moment you chose to listen, to reflect, and most of all, to continue. Depression, though silent and often invisible, never affects only the person who feels it. It echoes. It reaches others like a quiet wave that alters environments, relationships, and routines. In this scenario, family, friends, and close ones can be either a protective factor or, unfortunately, an unintentional obstacle to recovery. Not because they wish harm, but because they often don't know what to do, what to say, how to act. Emotional ignorance, which has nothing to do with a lack of love, is one of the greatest challenges for those living alongside someone in deep suffering. And that's why it's urgent and necessary to speak clearly. Those who stand by also need to learn, listen, understand, and above all, support without judgment. When someone is depressed, their inner world is already extremely confusing. Everything feels hard. Getting up, speaking, eating, leaving the house, replying to messages, smiling. The smallest tasks become burdens. And for this reason, demands, criticism, pressure, and well-meaning but misguided comments can have a devastating effect. Remarks like, "You just need something to do," "Cheer up, life's not that bad," "You're like this because you want to be." Others have it worse, "You need a job, not therapy," or "You have no reason to feel this way." These phrases don't help. They hurt, they invalidate, they push the person even further down. Because what a depressed person hears in those moments is not just a sentence, it's confirmation that they are not understood. And not feeling understood is one of the deepest pains of depression. Supporting someone with depression requires emotional presence more than advice. Sometimes the person doesn't need solutions. They need someone to sit beside them, even in silence. Someone to say, "I'm here," even when there's no conversation. Someone who accepts that they're not okay without constantly trying to fix them. Because healing isn't possible when the person suffering is forced to fake being fine to avoid being a burden. True support begins with empathy, entering the other's world without trying to immediately change it, without comparing pain, without measuring suffering. It's about listening with the heart, with humility, with the understanding that it's not about fully grasping everything, but about respecting everything the other feels. That doesn't mean you, as a family member or friend, need to suppress yourself or carry the entire burden alone. Quite the opposite. It's important to set boundaries, seek support for yourself, and share responsibility. Helping someone with depression doesn't mean being a hero. It means being human. It's being present with compassion, but also with clarity, and that includes gently encouraging the person to seek professional help, involving other family members when needed, looking for guidance in support groups, and understanding that you can be a support, but you are not the cure. Anyone who takes full responsibility for someone else's recovery will eventually feel frustrated, guilty, and exhausted. And that exhaustion can damage precious bonds. Another essential point is respecting the person's timeline. Depression doesn't follow a fixed schedule. Some days will be better, others worse. There will be progress, then setbacks. That's expected. That's part of the process. The role of the support network is key. Not to abandon the person when improvement isn't linear. It's to remain, not by pressuring, but by offering consistency, reminding them through words and actions that they matter, that they are loved, even in crisis, that their pain is real, but they don't have to face it alone. Small gestures, making a meal, helping with chores, sending a heartfelt message, can be deeply transformative. The depressed person might not be able to show gratitude right away. They might not respond at all, but they feel it, they register it, and one day they will remember. It's also essential to fight the stigma within families. Many times, the biggest barrier to someone seeking treatment lies within their home. Parents denying their children's pain, partners mocking the use of medication, siblings choosing silence over conversation. All of this needs to change, and that transformation begins with honest conversations, with emotional education, with openness to reevaluate outdated beliefs. Depression is not laziness, it's not weakness, it's not a lack of character, it's an illness. And like any illness, it requires care, attention, and respect. A family that understands this offers not just support, it offers a foundation for rebuilding. If you are standing by someone who is depressed, know this: your presence is more powerful than you imagine. You don't need all the answers. You don't need to understand every detail, but your listening, your patience, your consistent acts of love, even the ones unspoken, might be the thread that keeps the other person from falling completely. And if you're tired, scared, unsure of what to do, breathe. You deserve support too. You also need care. And by doing that, you not only protect yourself, but show the other, by example, that caring for mental health is an act of courage, of clarity, and of love. In the emotional stillness of depression, where every gesture feels too heavy, every plan too distant, and every morning begins with an inexplicable exhaustion, the idea of acting can feel impossible. But it is precisely within this paralyzing landscape that one of the quietest and most effective remedies can begin to take effect. The power of small steps. Yes, small ones, almost invisible to the outside world, but internally they begin to reawaken something essential: your capacity to choose, to react, to move. Because healing from depression does not begin with grand transformations. It begins with the courage to do the bare minimum, every day, even without motivation, even without strength, because it is in this bare minimum that life, slowly, begins to want to return. When we are depressed, routine loses its meaning. Hours blur, days drag, and a sense of frozen time sets in. The bed becomes both refuge and prison. Food is either avoided or consumed compulsively. Showers are postponed. Messages go unanswered. The body begins to shut down as if trying to disappear. And this is understandable. It's part of the collapse that depression provokes. But there is something that science and clinical practice repeatedly show. The reintroduction of routine, even symbolic, is one of the first signs of recovery. Because the brain, even when ill, responds to movement. It is plastic, it adapts, and it needs repetition to form new connections, gentle repetition, consistent, achievable. This isn't about following a packed schedule, nor is it about forcing productivity. It's about choosing each day one or two small actions that bring structure. Waking up at the same time, even with difficulty. Getting out of bed and opening the window, even without desire. Taking a shower. Eating something nourishing. Writing 3 sentences in a notebook. Walking for 5 minutes. Making your bed. Calling a trusted friend. Meditating for 2 minutes. The size of the gesture doesn't matter. What matters is that it is doable. And once completed, it must be acknowledged. Because a depressed mind tends to ignore achievements, to dismiss any progress. That's why it's essential to create the habit of noticing, I did this today and it matters. These small actions, repeated regularly, begin to reshape one's internal self-perception. The person stops seeing themselves only as out of control and starts to recognize that despite the pain, there is still a part of them that chooses, that acts, that decides. And it is that part that needs to be nurtured. The discipline of routine is not rigidity, it is care. It's a way of saying to oneself, my suffering is real, but I still exist, and as long as I exist, I can move. I can treat myself with respect. Another crucial element is physical movement. Science has shown countless times that regular physical activity, even light, has a direct impact on mood, sleep, energy, and levels of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. We're not talking about becoming an athlete. We're talking about moving the body, walking around the block, stretching, climbing stairs, dancing to a song at home. moving the body signals to the brain that paralysis is being challenged, and that challenge, even if minimal, is powerful. Because in depression, every movement is a silent act of defiance. Nutrition, too, must be approached with care, eating nutrient-rich foods, avoiding excess sugar, alcohol, and processed products, drinking water. All of this may seem basic, but it has a real impact on mood and mental function. The brain needs clean fuel. It needs nutrients. And in depression, nourishing yourself is a way of saying, I deserve to be nourished. But perhaps the most important point of this conversation is this. You don't need to feel motivated to take action. In fact, motivation comes after action, not before. Waiting to feel better before doing something is the most common path to remaining stuck. It's the cycle of, when I get better, I'll start taking care of myself again. But it's the care that brings the improvement. It's the movement that rekindles energy. So act even without the will. Act with love, with compassion, with patience. Every small step is a seed, and over time those seeds bloom. If today you can only do one thing, just one, choose something that connects your body, mind, and presence. Something that, however small, tells you, I care about myself. And tomorrow, do it again. And the day after that, repeat. Don't worry about speed. Don't compare yourself to anyone. Just keep going. One small step a day may not seem like much now, but one day when you look back, you'll see that it's moved you forward. And that, my dear, is everything. In moments of deep pain, when the ground seems to vanish beneath your feet and the horizon dissolves into mist, a silent question often arises, sometimes whispered in the dark, sometimes screamed through muffled tears. Why? Why is this happening to me? What is the point of continuing? Where am I going? And these questions aren't merely intellectual. They are existential. They arise from a place within us that longs for more than rational answers. It craves meaning. And it's at this point in the journey through depression that many people begin, or resume, a quiet and intimate search for something greater. Not necessarily for religion, but for spirituality, that human dimension that connects us to the invisible, to the transcendent, to what lies beyond matter and immediate logic. And this search, when honored and welcomed, can become a powerful thread of reconnection with life. Spirituality doesn't require dogma. It doesn't need temples. It doesn't demand specific names. It reveals itself in questions, in intuitions, in moments of deep silence. It lives in the sunrise seen from a window, in the wind brushing your face, in the tear that falls while listening to a song that speaks directly to your soul. It's found in a sincere hug, in contact with nature, in words that come out of nowhere and bring comfort. It's in prayer, in mantras, in meditation, in contemplation, in any act that brings the feeling that you are not alone. That even though the path feels dark, there is something within or beyond you that sustains your journey. For many, rediscovering spirituality during depression is like remembering a forgotten language, a language that speaks of belonging, connection, and meaning. And that doesn't mean denying pain. On the contrary, it means welcoming pain within a broader perspective, where it becomes more than just suffering and starts to be part of a transformation. It's not about romanticizing depression, but about recognizing it as a call from the soul to face what was neglected, denied, or abandoned. The emptiness brought on by depression often isn't just the absence of joy, it's the absence of meaning. And spirituality, when lived authentically, is one of the deepest ways to find meaning again. Some find this meaning in traditional religious beliefs. Others find it in spiritual philosophies, mindfulness practices, simple rituals, moments of gratitude, or reflections on purpose. Some discover that their spirituality is in serving others, helping those in pain, being present for someone in need. Others find it in the arts, in dance, in music, in books. What matters is not the path. It is the connection to something greater than pain. It is the remembrance that life is not only what hurts, it is also what transcends, what connects us, what moves us. And sometimes, all we need is one reason to take the next step. That reason often emerges from spirituality. Science increasingly acknowledges the value of spirituality in mental health. Numerous studies show that people who cultivate spiritual practices, even simple ones, exhibit greater emotional resilience, lower risk of depressive relapse, and improved quality of life. Because spirituality is not escapism. It's an anchor, a route, a direction. And for someone lost within themselves, that direction can mean the difference between surviving and being reborn. That's why, during therapy, many professionals encourage patients to reconnect with their deepest values, with their most sincere questions, with their faith, whatever it may be. If you've lost your faith, that's okay. No one is asking you to recover it all at once. But maybe, just maybe, you can allow yourself a space to listen, to be silent, to contemplate. Ask yourself, what gives me meaning? What still moves me? What makes me feel like I belong? These questions are keys. They don't need immediate answers, but they need to be asked, because they open inner doors that depression has closed. Doors that lead to a place where, despite everything, beauty still exists, connection still exists, a reason, however small, to continue still exists. Reconnecting with life is not about going back to who you were. It is about becoming someone new, someone who has known pain, but also knows what lies beyond it. It is about rebuilding a bond with existence, where you are not just a spectator of your suffering, but the protagonist of your healing. It is about realizing that even in the darkest nights, stars still shine, and that even behind the clouds, the sun is still there. You don't need to have all the answers now. You just need to make one choice, to keep seeking, because as long as there is seeking, there is life. And where there is life, there is still the possibility of a miracle. After making it through the storm of depression, after finding some relief, after being able to breathe more lightly again, a new worry often arises. What if it all comes back? This fear, though common and completely understandable, can become a silent shadow that prevents full surrender to the present moment. But here is the good news. Yes, it is possible to prevent relapses. It is possible to become stronger, to recognize your own warning signs, to develop practical care strategies, and above all, to build a new way of living, one that is more conscious, more compassionate, more prepared to navigate life's ups and downs. The first truth we need to accept is that relapse is not failure. It can happen, and it doesn't mean that everything you've done so far was for nothing. Just like in any other health condition, like high blood pressure or diabetes, fluctuations are part of the picture. But that doesn't mean you're back to square one. It simply means that your body and mind are asking for attention again. And the more familiar you are with your own emotional patterns, the sooner you'll be able to recognize the subtle signs that something is off and act before the situation worsens. Prevention begins with self-awareness. During treatment, you learn a lot about yourself. Your triggers, your negative beliefs, your thinking patterns, your behavioral cycles. Writing down these lessons, revisiting your therapy notes, keeping an emotional journal, observing how you react in certain situations, all of that becomes valuable material, because the more you know yourself, the faster you recognize when you're drifting off course. It could be a change in sleep patterns, increasing social withdrawal, recurring negative thoughts, or losing interest in activities you had recently regained. These signs are not fate, they are invitations to pay attention. Another key pillar is continuing treatment. Many people, once they start to feel better, decide to stop therapy or medication on their own, and this is a common and dangerous mistake. The decision to pause or end treatment should always be made together with a health professional, based on clear criteria and with a careful transition. In many cases, maintaining follow-up psychotherapy, even with longer intervals between sessions, is a smart way to stay connected to your process and preserve your hard-earned stability. The same applies to medication. Stopping abruptly can lead to adverse effects and increase the risk of relapse. Building a structured self-care routine is also essential. That doesn't mean a rigid schedule or an endless to-do list. It means establishing simple and sustainable habits that work for you. Sleeping well, eating mindfully, moving your body regularly, reserving quiet moments for reflection, making time for enjoyment, maintaining healthy relationships. All of these act as an emotional safety net, and the better you care for the basics, the stronger you become in facing the unexpected. Another powerful element in relapse prevention is your support network. Don't isolate yourself. Nurture real connections. Keep close those who allow you to be honest, who respect your boundaries, who don't judge your setbacks, who know how to listen. Sharing is an antidote to isolation and to denial as well. When you open up to someone you trust and say, "I'm not okay," that act alone already prevents pain from growing in silence. Whether it's with friends, family, support groups, or online communities, living in connection is part of the healing process. And finally, nurture a life project, something that pulls you forward. It doesn't have to be grand. It can be small, symbolic, personal. A course, a hobby, volunteering, an old dream you want to revisit. Something that connects you to the world and reminds you that you are here for a reason. Because the greatest antidote to relapse is not the absence of sadness, it's the presence of meaning. When you have something that moves you, something that calls you, even the hardest days have a reason. Even the suffering begins to make sense within a larger story. You don't need to live in fear of falling. You need to learn to build a stronger inner ground. And that ground is not built overnight. It's made of choices, of small and consistent actions, of daily self-care, of active listening, of genuine support, and above all of love. Love for yourself, even in the moments when it feels impossible to feel it. Because if there's one thing depression teaches us, it's that life doesn't need to be held up by perfection, but by presence. And you are here, now, listening, reflecting, growing stronger. And that in itself is already a milestone of transformation. After everything you've been through, after walking through layers and layers of suffering, of silence, of fear and doubt, there may still be a question inside you that hasn't yet been spoken. Now what? Who am I? When pain settles in for a long time, it begins to feel like identity. You start to believe you are the problem, the failure, the mistake. Depression, with its invisible weight, is a master at stealing not just joy, but the very sense of self. But here now, at this point in our journey, it's time to say with clarity, with kindness, with truth. You are not your pain. You are so much more than what hurt you. You are so much more than the diagnosis you received. You are so much more than the thoughts that torment you. And maybe it's time to start remembering or discovering who you really are. Pain does not define. It reveals. It reveals wounds, yes, but also hidden powers, dormant strengths, parts of you not yet seen. When you go through deep depression, you come to know the underside of life. And that, while terrifying, can also be the gateway to transformation, not the sudden or magical kind, but a silent rebirth, where slowly you begin to rebuild yourself from the inside out, with more truth, with more presence, with more depth. Because when you touch rock bottom and still choose to go on, you begin to develop something no theory can teach: emotional resilience rooted in experience. But for this rebirth to happen, you must release the old pact with self-criticism, that unconscious agreement that you're only worthy if you're productive, strong, useful, smiling. You must begin practicing what may feel impossible: self-compassion. To treat yourself the way you would treat someone you deeply love. To acknowledge your limits without punishing yourself for them. To honor your pain without turning it into punishment. To stop demanding perfection from someone who is healing. Because if there is something you need right now, it's not pressure, it's care. And care begins with the gaze you direct at yourself, the tone of voice you use with yourself, the stories you repeat about who you are. All of that, little by little, shapes the identity you carry into the world. Identity is not a fixed label. It's a living construction, and you have the right and the power to rebuild it. You can begin by saying, I am not the trauma I lived. I am not the mistake I made. I am not the diagnosis I received. I am someone in process. I am someone who feels deeply. I am someone who goes on despite it all. These aren't just slogans. They are internal declarations that you are separating from the pain. Not to deny it, but so that it doesn't define you completely. Pain may have been the longest chapter in your story so far, but it doesn't have to be the ending. And when that separation begins, something very special happens. Rebirth. Not a return to an old version of yourself, but the emergence of a new one, more attentive, more gentle, more conscious. You start to notice that you enjoy things you had forgotten, that you can feel pleasure again in a song, a scent, a walk, that you can begin to trust again slowly, in people, in ideas, that you can form new connections, new stories, new meanings. Rebirth is not euphoria, it's reconnection. It's remembering that life, despite everything, still pulses within you. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about all of this is realizing that even broken, you can bloom. The cracks can become channels for light. The wounds can become portals of empathy. Your pain one day may be what allows you to hold space for others' pain with more humanity. And so, your story won't be just one of suffering, but of someone who chose to transform suffering into presence, into wisdom, into truth. You no longer have to hide inside your pain. You can inhabit it with dignity, and little by little build your way out. Because you are not a mistake. You are a miracle in motion, a miracle learning with courage to exist more fully. And if you've made it this far, you already know. To be reborn is not to return to what was. It is to accept what is, and still choose to live.